In this video, I interview property rights attorney Dennis Flock, and we discuss how being a residential landlord in the United States may be losing its get-rich appeal. Dennis's law practice is in California, in LA more specifically, and he talks about how California laws are destroying landlords. And guys, whether you like landlords or not, many people who can't afford to buy a home choose to rent, from a landlord. Landlords do serve a purpose, and destroying them, like how California lawmakers seem to be doing, may end up hurting the ones they're trying to protect. Now, some believe that California policies are the main reason causing a mass exodus of Californians to other states throughout the U.S., as they claim bad policies are the reason for rising crime rates, rising homelessness, and contributing to some of the worst housing affordability in the nation. So let's listen to what happens in a state that rewards those who don't pay their bills and works to destroy those who try to provide housing for those who choose not to pay their bills. Don't just say, keep it in California, guys, as many Californian policies make their way into other states in one form or another. I hope you enjoy the show. Dennis, thanks so much for joining us. Why don't you just tell everybody a little about who you are?
Well, first of all, thanks, Todd, for having me on your wonderful YouTube channel. I have my own YouTube channel. It's YouTube at Evict123, at Evict, EVICT 123. And the reason why my channel is called that, because my website is Evict123. I have represented income property owners for 47 years. 47 years I have been beating the drum on the abuses that have been perpetrated on income property owners and landlords, and dealing with the media's works of how bad landlords are, when really, if you get down to the true nitty-gritty, you would see that in most instances, it's really the tenants that are causing the abuse. And the landlords, like any businessman, wants to do a good job. If you're selling shoes, you're not going to be mean to your clientele. If you're a good businessman, you're going to give them a good product. You're going to listen to their concerns. You're going to take their returns. And obviously, you're there to earn money. And the same thing is true with landlords. How landlords get this name that we're the pariah of society is just media driven. And it's just an attempt to pull down what is most sacred in this country. And what's most sacred in this country is property rights. Back in the 1600s, the Pilgrims came to this country. And most people think they came to this country for religious freedom. The truth of the matter is that they didn't come for religious freedom. They had already escaped from England to the Netherlands, and they came to America for economic freedom. And that's what this country is based on. It's based on economic freedom. And to the Pilgrims, it meant owning land. And right now, there is a push by our government, our elected politicians, to do as much damage as they possibly can to anybody who is owning property. Maybe it's currying political favors with tenants, and obviously there's more tenants than landlords. But what we have here is truly a taking of our property rights. So my law firm, which is now up to 25 attorneys, we're in the Southern California area, is dedicated to protecting landlords, protecting property rights. We have done, I would say, more evictions than any other law firm, probably in the United States. We're over 250,000. And most people, if they're hearing me, they're going to say, oh my God, this guy just throws poor families out. And that's not what the issue is. The issue is enforcing property rights. If you own a 7-Eleven store, and as we see on the news today, as I saw on the news today, these gangs coming in and just taking food, taking merchandise, and running out the door. Where is that have any common sense for a civilized society? But somehow, if a tenant gains possession of your property, and sometimes they just break in, but if a tenant does gain possession of your property, why isn't it the same thing as stealing merchandise from a Nordstrom store when you choose not to pay the rent? And even if in those small examples, and this is coming off from years and years of experience, even in those minute examples where, hey, truly, I don't have the money. I swear to you, Mr. Landlord, and legitimately, I would pay you if I had it. But where is it written in the law that now you become my next child? Why do I have to support you? I have my own family to support. I have my own children to support. Why isn't it that you have to leave my property? Why do I have to even go through these procedures? That has been insane. But anyway, that's a little bit about my firm and my mantra that I always like to start off with. But this is the society that we live, Todd.
Well, Dennis, you know a lot. I mean, we're on the East Coast or on the West Coast, and a lot of policy. I mean, I have clients that are real estate investors. I've been a real estate investor myself for the better part of 25 plus years. You and I have talked prior, and I told you that I've been getting more and more out of the residential side because it is true that even here in Maryland, and you guys have some of the worst, laws defending. I mean, weaponizing tenants against the landlords, I think, than just about any other state that I've heard of. But we do see these policies head east or spread out. But let's just dive in, but a little bit about talking about California, because during the pandemic, obviously, there was a period of time where there was an eviction moratorium, and it was pretty much nationwide. I don't know of any state that wasn't part of it. It was a federal, mandate, but where for a period of time, the tenants didn't have to pay their landlords, but yet the landlords obviously had to continue paying their bills, their mortgages, their expenses, taxes, insurance, and things like that. And I realized that it was something sort of unprecedented. We haven't seen this in our lifetime, but it seems that California sort of has these, whacked out and kind of laws. Why is it that California, California seems to be in the news more than any other state because of the social problems. And now, since the pandemic, we've seen, mass domestic exodus, where California is leaving the state, migrating to other states. You are seeing, rising crime, just like the smash and grabs that you're referring to. You have probably one of the most extreme homelessness problems in your cities, LA, San Francisco. I mean, what's going on?
Well, it's obviously our elected politicians. By the way, if you heard that debate with Gavin Newsom, he said that more people were coming to California than to Florida. I don't know. I tend to disagree. But what is it? I think it's people drinking Kool-Aid. It's insanity. It's just a world that is upside down. Let's take, for example, as you mentioned, the pandemic. The pandemic, no one could argue that the pandemic didn't have not only all social impositions on our society, medical impositions on our society, and of course, financial impositions on our society. But yet, we had it where in California, and certainly Southern California, landlords could not do an eviction for 3.5 years. 3.5 years, landlords could not enforce their property rights. They couldn't file a civil lawsuit. They couldn't file an eviction lawsuit. They had to let someone stay in their property. Now, we all know that how horrific the pandemic was, but how long was it? Was it for 3.5 years? Was it for 1 year, maybe? And yet we would see time and time again, tenants who hadn't paid rent for 2 years, for 3 years, they'd be driving up in brand new cars. I would get about 4 calls a week from my clients telling me that, hey, that guy who hasn't paid me rent, he just drove up in a new BMW and he's parking it in the driveway. Or they would say, I went on social media and I saw my tenant who hasn't paid rent vacationing in Cancun. So there was a total abuse. After the first year, I'll go on record because I've seen it personally. I would say 98% of the people who claimed COVID as a reason why they didn't pay the rent were merely gaming the system. And who was allowing them to game the system? It's the politicians. Look, if you're going to put a sign in front of a bank, and it's going to make it a legal sign that you can just walk in and take samples, you know what? People are going to walk in and take samples. So if you're going to have a situation where you're going to say, if you claim COVID, you don't have to. COVID went for a year, maybe a little bit longer. It didn't go for 3.5 years, where all these people rang up debts and the landlords were not allowed in any situation to enforce their property rights. Where is that written? Can you just go into a store and steal things? Well, kind of in California, yeah, they have this $1,000 rule. So it's okay to steal unless it's less than $1,000. So let me see. I'm going to pick the things that are only $999. But that's what we had when we dealt with these politicians making these crazy laws. Now, let's pretend you really had this downtrodden person really truly affected by COVID. Really would love to pay the rent, a very honorable, reasonable person. And yet this person who couldn't legitimately pay the rent, and in my mind, 98% were just gaming the system. But let's go to that legitimate person, okay? Where is it written that I have to support him? Why do I individually have to support the guy who's in apartment number 3, who hasn't paid me rent legitimately? He lost his job. He'd love to pay me. And it's totally due to COVID. Why is that my responsibility? When you're dealing with social welfare, at least it's coming out of all of our paychecks that we're contributing through our tax dollars. Where has it ever been written that one person has to support another person? Why is that my job? Okay. So, but this has started and gone on for so long. It all started with the soldiers coming back from World War II, and there was a limitation in housing. So, of course, if there's a limitation in housing, you just have to know about economics 101. It's based on supply and demand. Well, there was not that much housing when all these soldiers were coming back. So they instituted rent control. It was a temporary thing, Todd, temporary. That was back in 1947. Well, look where we are now, where the housing industry, residential housing industry, is infested with politicians creating rent control. I mean, people look at this and they go, wow, you need affordable housing. Well, that's nice. You also need affordable drugs. You also need affordable baby formula, as you also need affordable heat and gas. But none of these industries are subject to rent controls. There's only one industry that's subject to rent control, and that is residential housing providers in so many cities. In Los Angeles, for example, not only could you not raise the rent, in the city of Los Angeles, you couldn't even do a rent increase for 4 years. From March of 2020, they are finally allowing, this is last time I heard, pandemic's over. They're not allowing a rent increase until February 1st, 2024. We have almost a 4-year time period where they are not allowing us to do a rent increase. And after 4 years, and I don't know, maybe you've heard about this. Todd, have you ever heard that there's kind of been a little bit of inflation coming around
Yeah.
in this country? You've heard of that? The city of Los Angeles, and there's other municipalities too, is allowing, after 4 years of no rent increases, where Has our building suppliers gone up in prices? Has utilities gone up in prices? Has gas gone up in prices? Try to get a plumber to your building now. And before, you're literally paying 3 times the price. So the city of Los Angeles, which forbid any rent increase for rent control properties, now finally, after all this time, is now allowing, are you ready? A 4% rent increase. Any comments, Todd?
Yeah, I mean it really is terrible. I mean, we are seeing that happen around here as well. Where rent controls are in DC, and I think all the states will be looking at it. Let's talk about the issue that me working in the housing industry. I mean, you're obviously working in the housing industry, under a complete different capacity, but what I see is, and there has been a big divide on opinions to investors buying single family housing, right? I mean, it nationwide, if we look at the statistics from the National Association of Realtors, about a third or 30 some percent of the buyers of single family housing have been corporations, whether they're institutional buyers or mom and pop landlords. There's a real sort of underlying, I don't want to say anger, but an underlying displeasure on the landlord, right? From a buyer's perspective. You're hearing, you see all of these get rich schemes, courses being sold over the last 20 years, books being sold over the last 20 years on, how to invest in real estate and get rich, become, multi-millionaire. You see Instagrammers and TikTokers flashing cash, getting out of Lamborghinis, slamming the doors, talking about how they make $250,000 a month on other people paying their mortgages. So I get it. I mean, there is this pent up disappointment, if you will, against corporate America buying up the available single family housing. But you and I both know that it's necessary. I mean, landlords serve a good place. There are a lot of people that would prefer to live in a single family house. They can't afford to buy for whatever reason it is. They're where they are in life. But what is the answer? I mean, how are we overreaching now with the politicians? Because, there are a lot of people, I've made comments on my videos, and a lot of people are like, screw the landlord, like, hey, they should have unions against the landlords, because they're taking advantage of these innocent people. So are the politicians playing off of the emotions there versus, because you said it, there are way more tenants than landlords?
Well, obviously, it's a political decision that politicians have made that in terms of trying to get reelected, that it's more advantageous to pass laws in favor of tenants. But it's gone so far over the top. I mean, why do you think certain individuals, not to try to get too political, are allowing millions of people to walk into this country? It's got to be for a political reason of trying to garner votes. And that's the same thing in the landlord industry. Listen, the income property owners provide housing services. We are the largest industry in the United States, and we provide a very valuable service. We provide housing. Otherwise, where are people going to live if we're not providing housing? Because everybody doesn't have, as you mentioned, the wherewithal to go out and purchase a home. And yet, and in fact, our industry is the largest industry in the United States, much larger than the tech industry, much larger than agriculture, much larger than cars. Because if you don't believe me, all you got to do, ladies and gentlemen, anybody listening to this, walk outside of wherever you are, look to the left and look to the right, and you're going to see income property. So we have the largest industry, so we're a target. And the laws, and I want to push back a little bit, the laws need to be fair. I don't care whether you're a mom and pop owner you only have 6 units and you live in one of them, or I'm a person that owns 40,000 units, as one of my clients does. The law should be treated fair. This is America. And and last time I checked, this country was based on something called free enterprises. Where is free enterprises when you're controlling prices for one industry and one industry only? Now, I don't want to dissuade the listeners out there, and obviously you, Todd, dealing with real estate. Real estate creates wealth. We're not saying it doesn't, okay? But they are putting so much restrictions. And if the politicians are thinking, look, we have to do something. There has to be affordable housing. People need a place to live. Well, number one, why is that my responsibility? Okay, that's number one. And number two, if you want to create affordable housing, it's really simple. It's the basic thing that everybody learned in Economics 101, supply and demand. So you get more supply, and then the demand will be less, and then the prices will go down. So how do you encourage to have more supply of housing? Again, this is not a genius concept here. What you do is you make it easy for people to build buildings. How difficult is that? But I have an idea. If you come to Southern California and the hoops that you have to go through to build something, the permit, the process, the time period, why would any investor in the state of California want to do business here? You don't. So when you don't, what are you doing? You're exacerbating the situation. No one wants to build. The population grows bigger. And guess what? Rents are going to go up. Now, you have a rent control building. And this guy in this particular unit is paying $800 for a 1-bedroom apartment. Really way below the market. And I don't care what demographics you're in, you're way below the market. But the guy's been there for 20 years, okay? So what happens? How does the landlord make up that loss that he's losing every month? And sometimes he's paying utilities. He's literally making nothing. Well, what happens is when there's a vacancy, the next tenant is actually going to be subsidizing that tenant. Well, I got to get $2,500 for this unit because I got to get my money back on that other unit. So what you're doing is you're escalating rents. Rent control escalates rents. You don't have to be an economist to know this, and you can go look this up. Rent control escalates rents. If you let the market determine what prices will be, that's the joy of our country. That's what made our country the best country that the earth has ever seen. But when you start tinkering with it, all you're doing is you're creating a war between landlords and tenants where there doesn't have to be. There's not a war between you and the cafe you go to, right? So that's a purveyor of goods and services. And the same thing for landlords. Landlords, and my experience has been that while there is a bad egg in some landlords, just like there's bad police and bad politicians and bad real estate agents, sorry, Todd, but for the most part, 99% do their job. They do their job and they're offering housing services, but yet we're made out like the pariah for this industry. And by controlling the industry, what you're doing is you yourself, Mr. Politician, are escalating rents. To give you some examples, okay? We have literally 20 different local jurisdictions in the Southern California area. Different cities have different rules. It makes it really difficult for anybody to go forward to enforce any of their property rights, because if you're not hiring an attorney, you're going to fall on your face and die. So then the politicians in unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County and the city of Los Angeles started something called, are you ready? Threshold. What's a threshold, Todd? Well, let me tell you. Let's pretend you have a 1-bedroom apartment and it's going for $2,000 a month and the tenant doesn't pay you. No, I just don't feel like paying you. It has nothing to do with me losing my job. I just like a grab in a 7-Eleven. I just don't want to pay you. So normally what you would do is you would serve this tenant. In California, you serve a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, give them a chance. And then after the third day, you then file the eviction lawsuit. And that's totally legal. Except Los Angeles started something new called the threshold. So what's the threshold? Based on the amount of bedrooms in the unit, they have a different scale. So for example, for a 1-bedroom apartment, you cannot serve a 3-day notice unless you exceed $2,007. That's based on the fair market value as published by the Urban Housing Department. So if my rent's $2,000, I can't serve a 3-day notice for $2,000 because I'm below the threshold. Well, then how do I ever evict this person? Well, I have to wait to the next month. And I'm going to wait till January. Now it's 4,000. So now I'm above the threshold. But what happens if the tenant pays you the rent on the 25th of the month? He pays you the rent. Okay, I have to take it. He's paying me the full $2,000. Now January comes. Well, he doesn't have to pay, right? Because the politicians have told you, hey, you can wait the whole damn month. And then by the 25th of January, I'll pay you again. So what they're doing is they're forcing landlords, okay, to have to wait. So adding more pain, because you're never going to get this money. You're going to file a lawsuit. You're going to get a judgment, but the chances of collecting the judgment in a lot of cases are 50%, less than 50%. When the politicians started this thing dealing with the delay of payment of rent during the pandemic, they didn't say, oh, we're not telling you you're not going to collect rent for 3.5 years, landlord. We're just telling you we're delaying it for you. We're delaying it for 3.5 years. And then once that time period comes, which by the way is coming February 1st, 2024 for the city of Los Angeles, now you can go after them. Where the hell are these tenants that you're going to go suing them after 3.5 years? Are they still in your building? Did they move to Nova Scotia? Where are these tenants? So when the politicians said, we're just delaying the enforcement, you're going to get your money, what they were really telling you is we're stealing your money from you. We're going to make you be the social service provider individually. I've got clients where this tenant owes them $40,000, this tenant owes them $50,000, this tenant owes them $25,000, one single tenant. How do landlords support themselves? Okay, yes, you have the big guys, and they deserve just as much relief from the law as anybody else. But you also have the little guys who some of them are losing their buildings over this issue. But going back to that threshold, okay, so I gave you the example where you have to have more than $2,007 before you can serve a 3-day notice. Now, Todd, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of Section 8. Section 8 deals with where the government subsidizes the rent for people who legitimately have shown a need and they need some help with the rent. Okay, so in most situations, let's pretend the rent's $2,500 and the government pays $2,300 and the tenant pays $200. Now, God knows you're going to get your money from Section 8. Every single month, like clockwork, that $2,300 is going to come for this 1-bedroom apartment. But you see, the tenant's refusing to pay. I don't want to pay. It's only $200. I don't want to pay. Well, in the city of Los Angeles, we have to deal with this threshold. So, which means I can't serve a 3-day notice unless the amount in the 3-day notice exceeds $2,007.
10 months.
Actually, 11. Because 10 months would be 2,000. So I got to go 11 months without. And this is what the city of Los Angeles do. And they knew because they were debating this when they were putting this together during city council meetings. And they said, well, what about Section 8? Those guys will never get paid. They didn't care. So they instituted this, quote, threshold amount. So it is insanity. So now you're thinking to yourself, well, listen, this is crazy. It's bad enough with the threshold, but why would I ever want to have a Section 8 tenant? Why would I ever want to have a Section 8 tenant? Because Dennis told me about this law, the threshold. I got to be above the threshold. I'm never going to get it. This is a total waste. If the guy doesn't want to pay the rent, I'm only going to get my rent as the rent subsidy. I'm never going to get the rent. So therefore, I'm never going to accept a Section 8 tenant. So if a Section 8 tenant comes to me, I'm going to say no. Except,
So you can do that?
well, except in the state of California, because Governor Newsom and the other henchmen dealing with our state legislature passed a law. This was a couple of years ago. And it said, and by the way, this just keeps getting worse. It said, you cannot just summarily reject a Section 8 tenant. You have to have at least some reason for that. So, of course, I would advise all my clients, no worry, you don't have to take a Section 8 tenant. All you have to do is check their credit. You're always allowed to reject a tenant based on their credit. I mean, the first thing you do when you're loaning money, I'm going to check your credit. If you're a landlord, I'm going to do a credit check on you. And if your credit score is 420 points or 500 or low 600, I don't have to take you. So I said, you never have to worry about that to my clients. All you do is check their credit. The credit's not going to be good. So what law just passed January 1st, 2024? Some crazy politician, some state senator in this state, and I am just picking on California because that's where I am, but trust me, this train is coming to your state, ladies and gentlemen. So please don't just think it's crazy California. This train is coming to your state. But in any way, they just passed a law. You cannot now judge a tenant based on his credit score. What? You can't judge a credit of a tenant? That's the way every loaning or every credit institution deals with it. I'm going to check your credit. No, if you're a government subsidized tenant, I cannot use your credit score as a reason to deny you entrance into my building. I've got to take you. Well, then what can I do? Well, they say you have to now just gauge it on the ability to pay. That's what the law says, the ability to pay.
That's crazy.
If the tenant can show you verifiable sources that I have the ability to pay this $200 per month, you've got to take me. Now, we all know that if a person has bad credit, it's not necessarily because he had an inability to pay. It's because he had an inability to want to pay in many, many, many cases. It's just that, they had other priorities in their life. They needed a coat. They wanted another car. They wanted to go on vacation. And that's the reason why they didn't pay their credit card bill. But now it's your, quote, ability to pay. But a lot of times your credit is going to show you that this person doesn't like to pay. But that doesn't mean anything to politicians. By the way, anybody out there, if you want to know how to not take a Section 8 tenant, and that is, I recommend now, certainly in California, and there's many reasons why, is never do a 1-year lease. I know that sounds crazy. Never do a 1-year lease. There's so many jurisdictions now that for statewide rent control, if you're there less than 1 year, you don't have to worry about cause to evict. So if you just don't like the tenant, he's disrespectful, but not enough to evict. If he's been there less than a year for statewide rent control, which because every city in California has some rent control unless there's a local jurisdiction. But if you're there for less than a year, then you don't need good cause to evict. Same thing is true in Los Angeles. If you're there for non-rent control properties, you're there for less than 6 months. You don't need cause to evict. So I recommend just do a month-to-month tenancy regardless. Now, Section 8 will not accept you unless you agree to a 1-year lease. So we're not doing it for that reason, ladies and gentlemen. We're doing it on the basis that we want to make sure that we're not controlled, that we can get rid of a tenant if we don't like them for other reasons than just would be legal cause to evict, because that's what the law says. So I've kind of pontificated enough. Any comments, Mr. Sachs?
Well, it's very interesting. Here we made source of income a protected class a couple of years ago. So there were landlords that could say that they wouldn't take Section 8, and a lot of it's called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Now, I actually interviewed the director of the Housing Choice Voucher Program in Baltimore County in one of my podcasts, and I was surprised. I mean, I have had experience dealing with Section 8, and I never really had any trouble with it. In fact, I thought it was actually nice to get paid actually on time, and that it was, federally mandated that they must pay. The states must pay you, or the cities must pay you on time, or they'll lose their funding. But I was amazed at the backlog. If you applied, this is a couple years ago, but if you were to apply for a Housing Choice Voucher Program, there's a 25-year backlog. I mean, there are people that have been on this program for 20 years, 25 years, which is really surprising. It's like, I think that welfare can be a great thing to help people get through, certain times of hardship. But when you see that people have been on it for 25 years, it's like, wow. And, but to your point, you still can here in Maryland use other disqualifying, factors such as credit score, criminal backgrounds, things like that. So long as you establish sort of like a across the board, regardless of what the source of income is, as long as your landlord is using the same qualification methods to everyone else.
Of course.
Right. So, I mean, but it's an interesting point what you're saying, because if they won't accept you as a landlord in the program if you don't sign a 1-year lease, I mean, that certainly, I don't know if that is the same in Maryland, but makes sense. I mean, it's crazy. So when I looked, I just spent some time looking up the different codes, civil codes for protections, landlord protections or tenant protections primarily. One of the things that
protections,
no, it doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. And to this point, because I thought this was like crazy. So I've been a landlord for the better part of 25 years. And when I want to just take a step back for a minute and talk about rent controls, and to your point on the problem, when the government comes in and they do certain things, it ends up hurting the ones that they are saying that they're protecting in the first place. And when you're talking about rent controls, it certainly makes, if this affects, in my opinion, the mom and pops more than it does institutional landlords. And because me being a mom and pop landlord, I have tenants that are living in apartments that I haven't raised the rent since they've been there in 10 years. So rent controls with high inflation really hurts the ones that haven't been increasing these tenants every single year the way that a lot of, I guess what you would say, business people that, that are running a proper business would be doing, is making incremental rent increases. Is bad business to be maybe to not raise rents. But when these rent controls come in, it really puts the mom and pop that hasn't been pushing rent increases every year to now look for a way to just kick them out. They have to evict them. They have to not renew their lease so that they can bring the rents up to the market rate. With Section 8 in Baltimore City, so this used to be a game, right, for investors, because they would buy $1,000 houses, put $15,000 in them, and rent a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath home or 1 bath home for $1,500, $1,100, $1,300, $1,500 a month in Baltimore City, right? They're like, wow, what a great deal. You're in $30,000, $35,000 in these houses. Well, then they came out and said, no, we're going to do it by zip codes. We're going to do it by zones. You can only charge this much in this area, this much in that area. But one of the things I want to point out here that I was just blown away by looking is it was 1942.5 Civil Code. Talks about retaliation. And I want to kind of get in. I wanted some example, at least one good example of a case that you've handled lately. But I was really surprised at this, because this particular code talking about retaliation, I'm thinking, I'm clicking on it thinking, good, this is going to protect the landlord here. No, it's again to protect the tenant, that the landlord can't retaliate against the tenant. And I'm thinking, like, if I'm evicting somebody, one of my tenants, man, I've had terrible experience to retaliation. They trash my place. I mean, I've had them just destroyed. It cost me $20,000 to bring another place back to rent ready again. Can you tell us about a recent case? One of the things when we were speaking earlier in the week, you were telling me about this jury trial business now where, landlords are paying, they're required to have jury trials. Can you just kind of dive in and give us a sampling of what's going on with that?
Well, of course, all the protections are based on the flowing towards the tenant and not the landlord. You mentioned retaliatory evictions under 1942.5 of this California Civil Code. And what that deals with is that if you had let's say a tenant, this is a legitimate story, the tenant complains to the landlord that something legitimately is not working. I don't have heat, please fix it. And the landlord callously refuses. And let's pretend that you can just serve, he's on a month-to-month tenancy. You know what? I don't want to deal with this tenant. Let me just terminate his tenancy. That would be considered a retaliatory act by the landlord, and you would, in the state of California, be restricted from terminating that tenancy for a 6-month period, 180 days. So that's what the concept is. The problem is that all these do-good laws are just bastardized. So let's take, for example, the biggest one is the warranty of habitability. That's where the landlord warrants that the premises will be habitable, which means that, for example, in that same situation, hey, I don't have heat, Mr. Landlord. It's cold in California. Believe it or not, it's cold. I was driving today. It was 38 degrees when I was going to the office. And I need heat. And the landlord callously refuses. Well, under the, quote, doctrine of habitability, which started way back when in the state of California, a tenant was allowed to withhold his rent until the landlord fixed the unit. Sounds good, perfect, but here's the problem. In every single case that is filed, without exception, well, maybe a couple, but out of thousands and thousands of cases where tenants don't pay the rent, they all check the same box on their answer to the court when we're filing the lawsuit and they're responding to it, that the landlord has refused to fix the unit. It's all these, quote, do-good laws, and that's every single case. They use this as an excuse, and they check off all these boxes that are on these legal forms. There's bad wiring. There's no garbage cans. There's no heating. The windows don't lock. There's roaches, ceilings leaking. It's all this stuff, and you send a copy of the tenant's response to your client, and the client looks at it and says, "Oh my God, what are you talking about? I knew nothing of this. He's never said anything. This is not true." So finally, we had to do a form letter that when we send the answer of the tenant to the client, say, "We understand that in all these answers, the tenants are merely lying. You do not have to call me and tell me that these are lies. We know that they're lies." So, but this is this do-good politicians trying to, quote, protect tenants. But it's the bastardization of the legal system. It's the bastardization of our free economy, allowing people to earn a legitimate living when they're providing a very, very valuable service, which is the housing. Let's move on to another, quote, do-good law that couldn't be more bastardized, and that is emotional support animals. You have a policy in your building that says, I don't want pets. Okay, that's my right. I don't want pets. You know what? You get the barking, you get the more damage to the premises, you get the tenants who aren't cleaning up after their dogs, you get the potentiality that the dog's going to bite somebody and get loose, and then I'm making a business decision. Even if I like dogs, I don't want dogs in my apartment. And if you want to move into my building, you're going to sign a rental agreement that says no pets. Tenant signs it, moves in, knows the rules, moves in, and the next minute he's handing you a letter that this is an emotional support animal. What a bunch of garbage. And under the laws in the state of California, you have to have a letter from a medical professional, which indicates that this person has a disability and needs the services of a dog to feel better. Okay? These are these, quote, do-good laws. They are totally bastardized. Anybody can go to any doctor or any, quote, a medical professional, some psychologist, anybody that has a few initials after their names and has a license, and they get this. Anybody in the state of California, you want to have a dog, you can have one. Doesn't matter what your landlord says. They will tell you coming in, do you have any pets? I'm right on the application. Do you have any pets? No. Do you understand that this is a pet-free building? Oh, of course I do. You sign the contract, and what? A Great Dane? Where's this Great Dane coming from? Didn't you hear? So this is what we're faced with. We are faced with every non-payment of rent case. The tenant is claiming something is wrong with the unit. We actually put it into our 3-day notice. We have a phrase in the 3-day notice saying that, here, this is what you owe me. You haven't paid it. Please pay me. Oh, and by the way, we have not been informed of anything wrong with the unit. And we take our job as landlords very seriously. If there's anything wrong with your unit, please advise us in writing, and we will immediately inspect and correct if necessary. But if we don't receive anything in writing, then there's nothing wrong. We put that right into our 3-day notice. So we try to obviate their lies when they all of a sudden come up with their laundry list in their response to the court. And by doing that, we have a kind of an uppage. Well, did you send a letter? We even asked for it in the 3-day notice. Now, Todd, you were talking about the trouble of bringing forth an eviction case in the state of California. In the state of California, in most jurisdictions, you get a free attorney. Oh, did I say a free attorney for landlords? No, it's a free attorney for tenants. And right now, you can ask for a jury trial. Wait a second. You're telling me the guy didn't pay the rent for the month of December, and now I serve a 3-day notice? I'm above the threshold. I filed everything correctly. And by the way, you have no idea the amount of procedural requirements involved, so that landlords will make a mistake and lose their case. But okay, I did it all. Now they get a free attorney. They don't have to pay filing fees because they claim that they're downtrodden. Well, by the way, if you're downtrodden, you can't pay filing fees. How is it possible that you didn't pay the rent? I mean, obviously you don't have the money. But so they get a free attorney, and then they ask for a jury trial. A jury trial. How can you do a jury trial in the state of California? Every litigant in the state of California has the right to do a jury trial. But what if I put into my rental agreement no jury trials, and you signed it? Sorry, California state constitution says that you have the right to a jury trial regardless of what's in your contract. So these people are all asking for jury trials. So what happens with jury trials? Number one, we're entitled to a speeded up procedure because it's dealing with a landlord losing more money every day. So we get this expedited procedures for unlawful detainers or eviction cases, as it's called. So we're technically entitled to get the trial in 21 days. Well, you don't get the trial in 21 days. So you get the trial in about 35 days after the tenant contests. And then you go down there and you've prepared for the jury. You got all your jury documents. You've done all the paperwork necessary, and you announce ready. And the court says, we don't have enough courtrooms available, not enough juries that can handle this case. So we're going to send you back for another 30 days and another 30 days and another 30 days. So it's 3-4 months. All you have to do, you want to live forever for free, or at least 6 months for free, just ask for a jury trial, whether you're going to want to do one or not, because there's no jury trials available. These are free attorneys. We have to keep coming down to court on this, where eviction cases used to be a couple $1,000 with costs, and tenant was gone. This was the easy part of my life. And by the way, this is my 47th year of representing property owners. 47 years. I know that's impossible, but it is. With our 25 attorneys, I am so old, ladies and gentlemen, that 2 of those 25 attorneys are my kids. That's how old I am. But in any event, you're getting cases that are continued with more cost to the landlord. God damn, the rent was $1,700. He didn't pay December's rent. I am now into 15,000, which and our fees are actually less than most. $15,000, and it's 6 months down the line. I've lost 6 months worth of income, and then here's the rub: the tenant's attorneys are saying, "Okay, I know we haven't paid rent for 6 months," and this is the rub. I know we haven't paid rent for 6 months, but we're agreeing to move. You don't have to go through a jury trial. We're going to agree to move. Okay, great. Thanks. More expense to do a jury trial. Oh, one more thing. We want $20,000. Wait a second. What are you talking about? You haven't paid my client for 6 months rent, and you want $20,000 to move? Yep. If not, then let's just keep waiting for that jury trial. And you know what? We might even win the jury trial. Who knows? There's no guarantees that you're going to win a trial. Now, we actually happen to win. We don't do too many jury trials because the matters do settle. But of the jury trials that we do, we win about 95% of them. Most landlords think, gee, I don't want to go in front of a jury. They're all going to be tenants and we're going to lose the case. But that's really not the case. We do win these cases, but the cost to the landlord is astronomical. So you know what, Dennis? They're asking for $5,000. They haven't paid me in 6 months. They want me to waive the rent and give them $5,000 to move. What do you think? Well, I think that's terrible. But Dennis, are you going to guarantee me that I'm going to win this case after I pay you for a jury trial? Well, no, I can't guarantee that. So Dennis, you know what? I want to take that deal. And landlords take the deal. It's this formula of gaming the system, knowing that there's no courtrooms available, on a simple non-payment of rent case where there's nothing wrong with the unit, and a landlord is faced with legal bills, landlord is faced with loss of rent for 6 months. This system is terrible. You might as well, if you think this system is bad, it's the exact same thing of a mob going into a 7-Eleven and stealing their merchandise. That's what we have. That's what's going on right now. It's the same thing. It's this entitlement that the government has created. I'm sorry to tell you, we need strict law and order. We need that. There used to be, I'm so old, Todd. There was Abbott and Costello, and which was two comedians who did all these scenarios. Everybody here doesn't know who the hell I'm talking about, but that's okay.
I know who you're talking about.
but they would have this apartment, okay, in the middle of New York, and they called them the super of the building, like the manager, and they didn't pay the rent. So what they would do is they would tiptoe past his door and go up the stairs really quietly because they didn't want the super to see them, okay? So they had humility, right? Now, okay, and of course, Mr. Fields, the super, would always open up the door, hey, where's my rent, you know? But now, these people, there's no humility. Hey, I didn't pay the rent. I know I should have. You know, they're demanding service. You know, the garbage disposal doesn't work. The garbage disposal doesn't work. And oh yeah, I haven't paid rent in 6 months, but I want that garbage disposal to work, or I'm going to call building and safety. I'm going to call them over. You're going to get cited and you're going to get fined and you're going to have to do it. Wait a second. You're telling me the guy hasn't paid rent in 6 months and I still have to provide services? In the state of California, you do. Where is the fairness for this?
Yeah, well, you talk about cash for keys, essentially, you know, paying the tenant to get out. I mean, I have been involved, you know, I've represented, you know, banks and property foreclosures where the tenants are living in the properties. And we've tried that, you know, working with people, and very rarely does that work. There's no motivation for them. You would think, you know, hey, we're offering you $5,000 to get out. You know, don't worry about the back rent. Just, you know, you have to get out though. You know, upon inspection, we'll give you the $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000. And the issue becomes that, you know, they try and just push it. They're professional tenants, right? They try and push it as far down the line as they can. But the fact of the matter is they can't find another place to live because their credit's shot. They don't have any money. They don't have moving costs. I mean, a lot of these tenants are just, they get into these positions and they're just stuck. And a lot of these landlords didn't check, that I have dealt with through the years. They're calling me when they're in trouble, and they didn't do any background checks, they didn't do any credit reports. They just felt sorry for somebody, some kind of song and dance, let the people move in. And in Baltimore City, Dennis, I mean, we have on vacant properties, you don't even want to put a for sale sign because we have squatter rights, and we haven't even talked about that. I mean, they actually break in and move in, and you can't get them out. It takes you 7 months to get them out of the house. You can't just call the police and say, these people are in my house, and, arrest them. I had a situation, this is an off topic, crazy off topic, but not really. I have a commercial property that I'm developing right now, and we're in, the planning stages. But anyway, it's about an acre commercial site on a busy road. And my next door neighbor called me up and said, "Hey, Todd, man, are you having a wedding or something on your property?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Man, somebody's putting up a really big tent, like 100-foot tent. I mean, like a big tent." I'm like, "You're crazy. I don't have it." He said, "What, do you want me to go over and ask them what they're doing?" And so, of course, I said, "Yeah, sure." So he's on the phone with me, walks over. I hear him saying, "Who's in charge here?" Blah, blah, blah. He says, "The guy over there." So he goes over, talks to the guy, and the guy, I mean, you could hear my buddy's recording the whole thing too. I have it on video. And essentially this says he's a pastor of this ministry, decided that he was going to have a tent revival on my property. And he built this huge tent, rented it, thousands of dollars to have it set up. So I call up my engineer, I'm like, "Man, you're coming with me. We're going and looking at what's going on here." I go there. He refused to leave. So I called my attorney. It cost me thousands of dollars ultimately to get this guy evicted properly. But essentially what happened was I called the police. And I said, "Look, this guy's trespassing on my property." They said, "Well, he's got a permit." I'm like, "He's got a permit for what?" He said, "Well, he's got a temporary tent permit." So, he went online. It was during the pandemic, got the tent permit, and was erecting this tent. So here's what I did. I said, "I'll tell you what, I don't know who you rented the tent from, but that tent's mine. Because tomorrow morning, I have a fence company that's coming out tomorrow morning, and they are fencing this entire acre in, and that fence is mine." And I called the tent company, and I told the tent company, "That fence is mine. The tent's mine, right? I'm fencing it in tomorrow." And they came and got their tent. But my point is, it took a while to get that permit canceled, terminated. It's just, it's crazy. Tell me what's happening with tenant unions. You guys have tenant unions. What kind of role do they play in all this madness that you're describing?
Not really too bad. There are tenants unions, and what they'll do is they'll come out and they'll picket in front of the landlord's house and make up all claims where a tenant has created so much trouble, but yet they'll be the cause célèbre of the day, and they'll try to protect this tenant who deserves to be evicted. There's the Tenants Union of Los Angeles, and we had the pleasure of evicting the head of the tenant union from one of my clients' properties. But it's just a grab. Going back to your issue of just like a vacant house, people will just break in, and you call the police, and then the tenant, or not the tenant, but the thief will just produce a rental agreement that he got online, which has the name Mr. Smith as his landlord. And the police will say, "Hey, I don't know whether this is true or not. So this is a civil matter." So then people have to call us, and we have to do an eviction. It's called a forcible detainer. I had a lady call me up today, vacant land. Somebody's been there for 5 years. And they haven't done anything, and now they call me up. So this is going to be a much more complicated case because of that. But when you go back to, go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay. When you go back to this concept of cash for keys, this is the scourge of rent control, which nobody really talks about, which creates higher rent. But you have landlords where a legitimate tenant, hey, my rent is $650 for this bachelor unit. I've been there for 100 years and I'm a protected tenant. I've never caused you any problem. I never even asked you to fix something. But the landlord knows that he can get $2,500 for this unit. So what's that worth to him? Okay, to get another a couple $1,000s per month. I don't know about you, Todd, but if I had a deal for you where you gave me $40,000 and guaranteed I'd give you $2,000 for the rest of your life, I would submit to you, if it was guaranteed this was going to happen, you would give me $40,000 faster than you blink, correct?
Absolutely.
So landlords are faced with this same situation. Hey, I get a couple $1,000s more. I'm ready to give you $20,000, $30,000. So you're making it where landlords who own the property, ladies and gentlemen, and they're the ones who have to pay this. I myself, on a duplex that was family owned, we gave a tenant $37,000. Now, the tenant was paying $995. It was a duplex. This was one. The other one was vacant, thank God. We put in about $400,000 fixing it up, but now I'm getting $5,500 per unit, and on a property here in the Los Angeles area. So the $37,000 was tantamount to zero. It's nothing. So, but yet we have this warring camp where landlords are now forced to go to these extreme levels because of rent control, because you can't do with your property. Look, Todd, I have an idea. You have a car. It's probably parked right outside where you are right now. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Okay. And if you want to sell that car, okay, for $300,000, you have the right to do it. And any real estate that your clients own or you own, if they want to get $40 million for this single family house, average single family house, they have the right to list it. Where is it written that somehow, because my name happens to be income housing provider, that now I am limited in what I can charge? It is insanity.
I want to tell you a little story. I don't know if you ever have come across a story quite like this one, but I had a client, a group of investors one time bought a block of homes in Baltimore City, a pretty rough area. And it's all built up there now, but going back, almost 15 years, I guess, this happened. But I had to go and do some lock change outs. They finalized the deal and they were going to renovate them and then sell them and keep a couple of them as rentals. So I went down to change the locks out, thinking that they're vacant, and they were all occupied. So as I was going from door to door to door, people were answering the doors and seemed to be respectable people saying, "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I rent. I've been living here for 3 years. I've been living here for 4 years."
Legitimate tenant.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, who's your landlord? And they said the lady across the street, right? This woman that lived across the street from this block of houses, vacant houses, which was at once board ups that my clients bought at tax sale from the city of Baltimore, had unboarded the houses, turned the water on in the fronts of the street, street front and the property fronts. And they applied for gas and electric at Baltimore Gas and Electric and got it. And she was collecting rent for however many years on properties that she didn't even own that were, I don't know if it was just when you were talking about your story, it just popped into my head. It just reminded me of, I thought this, of course she denied it. I went over, knocked on the door and said, "Hey, what am I missing here?" And she's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know any of those people. I've never talked to them. I've never seen them before." And denied everything, but it took months and months and months to finally get everybody evicted.
And then, of course, these tenants are actually innocent tenants. Right. But while you're an innocent tenant, you have to understand that if I buy a car from you and I give you the money, but the car you're selling, you don't own, okay, that doesn't give the true owner of the car the right to get the car back, even though legitimately I was paying my rent to this person. She gave every indication that she was the owner. You're still out the money. You still got to move
Right.
because who you rented from. But we see this all the time. In fact, there was a case in California. I think it was in the Riverside area, Riverside County of California, where this wonderful couple got their money together and bought a house from the owner who was living in the house. This was during the pandemic, and this made national news. You might have heard of it. And money changed hands. Deed was recorded. They get to the house, and the seller's there. Well, get out. No, I'm not. That seller stayed in that house for over 2 years, and they had to pay their mortgage. They were basically restricted from going forward with an eviction because there was no evictions because, oh my God, the pandemic. Which created so much havoc for years and years. Yeah, right. But so it made California news, actually it made national news that this person stayed in the house, and they would have like the teams of reporters coming out and trying to interview the homeowner, the seller, and then he would run back into his house. But eventually they did get him out.
I'm surprised news covered it. Yeah.
Yep.
So talk to me about short-term rentals. Are you seeing the same thing with those? I mean, are you seeing where tenants are renting for the weekend and just never leaving?
Well, in many of the jurisdictions here in California, there's restrictions on short-term rentals. You have to have a license. You have to be, if you're the owner, you have to be living in the unit for at least 2/3 of the year and only rent out 1/3. But we have seen some horror stories, and where my firm has handled some horror stories, where the tenant's there and then just stops paying Airbnb, stops paying the landlord, and the landlord is forced to go forward with an eviction, jury trials. I mean, it's for the faint of heart. It is, and this is not a newsflash, ladies and gentlemen. For the faint of heart, I don't think it's a smart idea to buy income property or do any kind of development in the state of California. Unlike what Governor Newsom knows, our governor here in California, people are flocking out. I just did a project now in Las Vegas. I will not do any more investing in California. I have a lot of residential properties. I've got office buildings where my own office is, but in terms of any further investment, I just don't think it's a good idea. The building restrictions, which create a lack of housing, which creates higher rents. But this is what the politicians want to do, and this is what they're doing. So it's I don't think it's a smart idea to be investing in the state of California, any place else.
I think that is, like you said, it's going to spread to other states. I see it here in Maryland. Investors selling their rental properties and not wanting it anymore, and me being included in that. I've been exiting the residential rental market over the last several years myself, going more into the commercial space. So I mean, So Dennis, let's just try and land this plane here. I mean, what do you think? You say it's the politicians. We have a nationwide housing crisis, affordability crisis. We're now looking at ridiculous propositions of putting communities of tiny homes. I just did a video of that recently, talking about how Denver, the districts in Denver are now building tiny home communities to house their teachers that, even despite the raises, can't afford to even rent a traditional home. What's the agenda behind all this? A lot of people, I don't want to go off the deep end here, off the rails too bad. But I mean, what's your opinion on this Rent and Be Happy, World Economic Forum? I mean, where's this all going? I mean, do you have any kind of, I know you said, hey, look, you've ran your gamut 40 some years doing what you do, dealing with fighting legislators and defending property rights. What's the end goal here? Where are we going?
I have no idea where we're going. All I know is if you're having a housing shortage, why would you let 10 million people into this country illegally? Why would you encourage that? I mean, going to another topic, and if I step on people's feet, so be it. But if you're saying that there's a housing crisis, where are all these people going to live? You're letting 10 million people in who immediately jump onto welfare. You're with your building code violations, your requirements and permits. You're making it much more difficult to afford to put up housing at a reasonable rate. You create all these laws dealing with tenants' rights, which just dissuades investors from going into residential housing. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to sit there and build a 50-unit building in a jurisdiction which has prohibitive rules regarding permits, prohibitive rules with regard to tenants' rights? It's just, why not do anything else with your money? Go to Las Vegas and put it on a slot machine or something, because it just doesn't make any sense to do this. So you create your own housing shortage on every level, and it just doesn't seem to be getting any better. California is off the rails, which is why people are leaving the state, and quite frankly, why our phones just light up dealing with landlords' problems and advice. We get free advice over the phone. We're kind of an unusual firm that you don't even have to be a client. You call up with a question, we're going to answer that question for you and move on to the other call. I today took about 55 phone calls when I got to the office until I left today. But and of course, we took in many cases where legitimately tenants were violating the terms of their rental agreement or just merely not paying the rent. But I really don't know where this is going. This world is upside down. I think it needs to sink lower before people finally rise up and say, you know what? I would like to be able to walk out on my streets and not have a fear that I'm going to get killed. I'd like to be in a store where I know the storekeeper knows that there's some sort of law and order that's going on. I would like people to be able to build things and not be sandwiched between these permits and regulations, which make it so much difficult that who wants to do any building anymore? My son was redoing his house. This is a couple of 3 years ago. And they said that they had to electrify it for solar panels. But my son says, but I'm not putting in solar panels. He says, no, if you're going to do this renovation, you have to set it up that if you do solar panels, okay, that you will be ready for that. Well, I mean, these laws are insane. And by the way, for the record, I have an electric car and I will never go back to a gas car. I'm not an environmentalist, but I think it's just a great car. And I love not having going to a gas station. But you see, that's based on technology. It's not based on someone from the government telling me what to do. Okay, I've made that decision on my own. And you build a car, and I think my car is a great car. And it's not a Tesla, by the way. I think my car, I do not own a Tesla. But I think this car is a great car. And I didn't have to think about the environment. I didn't have to think about that, gee, I'm going to get a tax credit. I didn't have to think about, you got to buy this car. If you let technology, if you let the market determine where we're going to go, we will return to the great country that we are. But if you're going to put regulations on everybody, you're going to basically make what's happening here is a socialist society where we're having thems that have give to thems that don't. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, it's great having this conversation with you. I think anybody that, listening, obviously, if you are a landlord, you should definitely subscribe to Dennis's channel. Links are in the show notes below. He does a free live show. I think, Dennis, Saturdays, right? You've been doing this Saturdays?
Every Saturday, and I encourage people to join every Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We have a Zoom meeting. You can also catch it on YouTube Live. And I encourage people who have any questions, you can, whether you're in California or not, we're happy to answer it. You can get my Zoom credentials or the YouTube on my website, which is evict123.com. Todd, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your channel. You are so well known across this country of ours, and really it's a privilege to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate it, sir, and we'll do it again very soon.
Yes, we will. Take care, sir.
Thanks so much. You too. All right, guys, there you have it. I hope you made it to this point, to the end of this show. And guys, we would love to hear your comments. You can drop them below. Go ahead, cruise on over to Dennis Block, subscribe to his channel. I mean, look, like realtors, attorneys, they can get a bad rap. But guys, I just think it's awful the way that we are in this country destroying the housing market, not just from the homes that you can buy, it's also the homes that you can rent. The policies, it's just getting out of control. I'd love to know your comments. Drop them below. And don't just keep this information to yourself. One of the biggest compliments that you can do for us here at Sachs Realty is by sharing this video with your family and friends. And if you haven't subscribed, consider doing so now. Hit that alert bell. You'll know every time we upload content just like this. See you next time.
Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal housing opportunity.